Warwickshire, in the heart of England, looks peaceful, but its past tells a darker story. Beneath its fields and villages linger centuries of betrayal, tragedy and fear. Ghosts are seen, witches are whispered about. History and the supernatural intertwine here. From the silent corridors of stately homes to the ruins of once magnificent strongholds, from murders to sorcery, these are the paranormal stories shaped over centuries. Welcome to the Ghosts of Warwickshire. Charlcote Park is a striking 16th century country house set in a deer park on the banks of the river about 4 miles east of Stratford-upon-Avon. Managed by the National Trust since 1946, it was remodelled over time, especially in the 19th century, yet still retains its Tudor character and a reputation for ghostly activity. Built in 1558 by Sir Thomas Lucy, whose family held the land from the 13th century, the house is closely tied to William Shakespeare. Tradition claims a young William Shakespeare was caught poaching deer on the land and brought before Lucy, an important magistrate in Warwickshire. According to the story, after being presented to Sir Thomas Lucy, the young Shakespeare was detained at Charlcote for the remainder of the night, possibly awaiting questioning or punishment. One enduring version claims Shakespeare later took his revenge in verse, composing a mocking poem about Sir Thomas and posting it on the entrance of the park. Another story says Shakespeare left for London to avoid trouble, with some believing Lucy inspired the comic Justice Shallow in The Merry Wives of Windsor and Henry IV Part 2. Sir Thomas Lucy hosted Queen Elizabeth I here for 2 nights in 1572, when she was on her way to see her favourite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. She slept in what was the great bedchamber at the time, and today this is part of the house's drawing room. The Lucy family commemorated the visit by placing her royal coat of arms above the front porch. Much of the house has been altered since those days, but the gatehouse is just as it was during Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth's time. At Charlcote Park, the most frequently reported apparition is a young woman, seen running silently across the grounds towards the lake, where she appears to sink beneath the water without a trace. Some identify her as Catherine Wheatley, widow of Thomas Lucy. Her life became the subject of a dark tale after her 1686 marriage to George Fitzroy, an illegitimate son of King Charles II. When the marriage deteriorated, he sent her to a convent in Ghent to remove her from society. Although the convent stated that she entered willingly, Catherine later escaped, returned to England, and faced with a potential scandal, he was forced to acknowledge her position. What became of her happiness afterwards is unknown, adding to the mystery around her name. Not all agree on the identity. Some believe the figure may be a despairing servant or another troubled soul. Witnesses consistently describe the same pattern. The girl runs to the lake, slips beneath the surface, and vanishes without disturbing the water. Many speculate that Shakespeare may have seen this ghost himself, for there is a persistent legend that this is the very spot where he found the inspiration to pen his lines regarding Ophelia's death in the play Hamlet. Some people say the tragic ghost of the young girl can be seen beneath the surface of this lake, still trapped today in her watery grave. Whether folklore or memory, the image of the silent girl at the lake remains one of Charlcote's most haunting traditions. Alice, Lady Fairfax Lucy, became chatelaine of Charlcote Park when her husband assumed leadership of the family in 1965. A keen historian and writer, she researched the estate's past and supported the National Trust after most of the house passed into its care, with a private wing retained by the family. She stated, "Our wing is very much impregnated with a sense of the past, that is, with the 3 generations who lived in it, since it was built in the 1830s. The green room is in the original part of the old house, and had a door opening onto the minstrel's gallery above the great hall, and it still has a small room off it. I have myself been conscious of a pressure of people and an unidentifiable hubbub of voices when alone in the room. My daughter slept in the green room bed and confirmed this. She awakened in the night to find herself on the floor, with a crowd milling around her. But at the same time, I have to say that others have slept there and heard nothing. But as Lady Fairfax Lucy so rightly says, ghosts are not to be commanded and, in my experience, appear to be the most unlikely people." She also described hearing a confused noise of raised voices in the small room that had once been used by musicians, saying it sounded as though an argument was taking place and was accompanied by violent actions. She added that an old servant who had been with the family for 60 years had told her that a footman who had drowned himself was sometimes seen as a black figure standing by the waterfall. Charlecote Park is now displayed to visitors as it would have been in the 19th century, with a Victorian kitchen, laundry and family carriages in the coach house. Yet, one member of the Fairfax Lucy family still lingers, even after death, occasionally making her presence felt when she disapproves of how the estate is being managed. Eleanor Fairfax Lucy made a small home in the tack room. She transformed the once functional space into a personal retreat, complete with a fire in the grate and a stag's head displayed above the mantelpiece. The National Trust sought to preserve the room's character after her death in 1979. Staff discovered drawers filled with valuables, documents and personal items. In a blanket box were a variety of possessions, including a number of hats, one clearly the same as in a photograph of her riding her favourite pony. The hats were placed on the stag's antlers in a playful display, but a few days later an administrator discovered that the hats were no longer on show and he found them back in the blanket box. Believing that the house steward or the cleaning staff had moved them, he replaced the hats on the antlers and mentioned the arrangement to his colleagues. To his surprise, none of them had touched the items. The following morning, the hats were again back in the blanket box. The administrator placed them one more time on the antlers and secured the tack room for the night. The tack room could only be reached through 2 locked doors. When he returned the next morning, not only were the hats back in the blanket box, but the photograph of Eleanor had vanished. The sandstone ruins of Kenilworth Castle rise from the Warwickshire countryside as a monument to ambition, power and royal drama. For nearly 900 years, these walls have seen siege and splendour, rebellion and romance, and even glittering entertainments for Queen Elizabeth I. Few English castles carry such a layered past. Yet, when the visitors leave and the light fades, the ruins seem to change. Wind slips through empty windows, and stories linger of figures glimpsed where no one stands. Many believe the powerful emotions tied to Kenilworth's past, love, betrayal and conflict, never truly faded. Founded around 1120 by Geoffrey de Clinton, a royal chamberlain to Henry I, the castle was expanded under figures such as King John and John of Gaunt. With its Norman keep, earthworks and water defences, it was built to project authority as much as to repel attack. Kenilworth was built not just to defend, but to impress, intimidate and secure influence. Its greatest trial came in 1266, during the Second Barons' War, when a 6-month siege tested its mighty defences. Protected by its vast man-made lake, the defenders held out until starvation forced surrender. By the late Middle Ages, Kenilworth had become a royal residence, hosting kings like Edward III and Henry V. Its most glittering era began in 1563, when Elizabeth I granted it to her favourite, Robert Dudley. He reshaped Kenilworth into a palace of display, culminating in the famous 1575 visit, a 19-day celebration filled with feasting, grand entertainment and lavish banquets to delight the Queen, in what many historians see as an attempt to win her hand in marriage. The visit became legendary for its scale and splendour, and it marked the high point of Kenilworth's history. Sir Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was responsible for the construction of the castle's Tudor stables. Today, the building survives as a striking example of mid-16th century architecture, housing a museum detailing the castle's history and a tea room. But the stables are more than just history and heritage. They have also become one of the castle's paranormal hotspots. Staff and visitors have reported unexplained phenomena here. The building is said to be haunted by a young, spectral stable boy, seen in ragged period-style clothing typical of the Tudor era. He has been glimpsed not just around the stables themselves, but also near Leicester's gatehouse and among the ruins, darting past visitors or fading into the shadows. Staff have reported strange sounds, including voices from behind locked doors. Alongside the stables, Leicester's gatehouse has a strong paranormal reputation. It was built around 1560 by Robert Dudley to replace an older gateway and create a grand approach from Coventry. A fine example of Tudor architecture, the gatehouse blends defence with decorative details that advertise Dudley's wealth. The castle was deliberately slighted after the English Civil War to prevent further military use. Colonel Joseph Hawkesworth was responsible for the slighting, but he briefly turned the gatehouse into a residence for himself, while other buildings were stripped. But he was removed following the restoration of King Charles II. Several visitors over the years have described seeing the same spectral figure in Leicester's gatehouse. A young woman, roughly 20 years old, who appears quietly absorbed in her own world. She is typically noticed near an upstairs window, seated in the light, seemingly focused on something in her hands. Some observers believe she is sewing, though others think she might be reading, but all agree she pays no attention to the people around her. One well-known sighting took place during an event when music was being performed in the gatehouse. Among the audience, a woman suddenly became aware of a finely featured young lady next to the bay window. Dressed in pale, old-fashioned clothing with a simple headdress, the figure appeared calm and self-contained before fading away from view moments later. In the Elizabethan-era chamber, positioned at the foot of a magnificent four-poster bed, a wooden antique cot rocks by itself when no one is nearby, as if an unseen presence has just moved it. Other strange phenomena in this part of the castle include unexplained smells like tobacco or pipe smoke in empty doorways and footsteps on the stairs. Witnesses have described an upset little girl asking for her father, a tall man in black who apparently died in a sword fight centuries ago, and a small old lady attempting to light candles that are no longer there. A pale, female figure has been reported among the ruins of Kenilworth Castle, though her identity is uncertain. One suggestion links her to Amy Robsart, wife of Robert Dudley. Married in 1550, their relationship was troubled by political pressures, Dudley's imprisonment under Mary I, and Amy's ill health. Their relationship was marked by rumours of infidelity and the possibility of Amy being kept out of royal events, which contributed to the couple's estrangement. In 1560, Amy was found dead at the foot of a staircase at Cumnor Place in Oxfordshire. The inquest ruled it an accident, but rumours spread she'd been murdered to allow Dudley to marry Queen Elizabeth I, a scandal that tarnished his reputation. Another theory places the figure in the upheaval of the English Civil War, suggesting she was the daughter of a royalist officer caught in the conflict. A later Victorian legend speaks of a bride named Constance Hazlitt, said to have searched the grounds for a missing fiancé on her wedding day and who met a tragic fate. Perhaps we'll never know the identity of this mysterious lady. A few miles north of Warwick lies the small village of Baddesley Clinton, noted for its church, St Michael and All Angels, and its famous moated manor. Founded in the 13th century by the Clinton family as parts of the Forest of Arden were cleared for farmland, the manor of Baddesley Clinton and its church have long been linked with tales of haunting. Behind its timber frames, stone floors and encircling moat lies a harsher history. During the most perilous years of the Tudor era, it sheltered Catholic priests, when discovery could mean imprisonment, torture or execution. Houses like this were searched, but the moat, gatehouse and secret hiding places offered protection. The Ferrers family, who held the house for 12 generations, stayed loyal to their faith despite the danger. It is perhaps no surprise that some believe those from the past still linger. One of the oldest ghosts linked to Baddesley Clinton is said to be that of Nicholas Broome. The manor first rose to status under John Broome, an ambitious lawyer who acquired it in 1438 and began shaping it into a grand residence. His career faltered after he supported the losing side in the Wars of the Roses. A bitter dispute over money with John Hurthill, steward to Richard Neville, ended violently in 1468 when Hurthill murdered Broome in the porch of Whitefriars Church in London. The feud did not rest there. In 1471, Broome's son Nicholas tracked down his father's killer and slew him in turn. His punishment was comparatively light, to pay for a priest to say daily prayers for the souls of both his father and John Hurthill, and pay compensation to Hurthill's widow of 33 shillings and 4pence. Nicholas later inherited the estate, and in 1478 appointed William Foster as a priest. Years later, returning home late and somewhat inebriated, he found his wife in the parlour with a man, her head resting on his shoulder. Enraged, Nicholas drew his sword and killed him, only to realise he had struck down Foster, who had apparently been offering comfort. The apparition of a 15th century Catholic priest is sometimes seen in the property, particularly in the library and the parlour. In the 1950s, the ghost of a priest was seen conducting mass in the chapel and removing vestments from a box. For many centuries, visitors used to hear the story of the stain on the library floor, said to indicate the spot where William Foster was slain, though detailed tests indicate that this stain is from the Victorian era and that the substance is animal in origin. Haunted by his actions, Nicholas sought absolution through acts of devotion, financing church towers at Baddesley and at St Giles, later nicknamed the Towers of Atonement. Though pardoned by Henry VII for the 2 murders he committed, he lived in remorse. When he died in 1517, he requested to be buried standing up, beneath the church threshold, so worshippers would walk over him as they entered, a final act of humility from a man marked by violence and regret. His final wish was indeed carried out. But Nicholas Broome does not seem to rest. His ghost walks along the path towards the church, paces up to the door beneath the tower, where his body remains to this day, before suddenly vanishing. His apparition is seen every 10 years on the anniversary of his death and is due to appear in 2027, though he manifests on other occasions too. Perhaps he was the mysterious man in medieval clothes seen just outside the church entrance in 2002 by a local villager before disappearing into thin air. The manor at Baddesley Clinton passed to the Ferrers family through marriage, beginning a long connection with the house. Secret refuges were built to protect Catholic leaders. 3 priest holes are recorded, and some believe others remain hidden. In 1884, an unusual incident occurred in the tapestry room. A visitor to the house woke abruptly to see a fair-haired woman in a long dark dress glide silently past her before vanishing through a closed door. 3 years later, the same visitor returned to the property, and on this occasion she slept in the stateroom. Once again, she awoke from her slumber to see the ghostly figure manifest. The room was flooded with moonlight, and the visitor could clearly see the apparition's hair, dress and face. She knew this figure, standing beside the writing desk, facing the bed, was the same form she had witnessed in the tapestry room. Her features looked similar to those of the Ferrers family, but she was unsure of the identity of this ethereal lady. It transpired that others saw this figure, staff and visitors who observed her in the upper areas of the house, in bedrooms and corridors. She even startled a visiting clergyman who entered his bedroom to see the apparition sitting in a chair before vanishing. In the 1920s, a cleaning lady brought her daughter to Baddesley Clinton, hoping the child would be able to entertain herself in such a unique place whilst she got on with her chores. Later, when the mother went to check on her daughter, the little girl replied that she wasn't bored because she'd been playing with the lady dressed in grey. The manor house on that day was empty. In the 1990s, 2 volunteers were closing up for the day when one spotted a spectral woman dressed in grey, holding a candle. The witness prompted her colleague to look, but sadly the figure had already disappeared. Footsteps are among the most persistent phenomena, sometimes quick and light, sometimes slow and heavy. Rebecca Ferrers, who lived here from 1867 to 1923, carefully recorded such events. She wrote, "I once heard that solemn tread. It had an indescribably awful and mournful sound, and affected me deeply. It had a very weird effect to hear the handle jerked loudly within a few feet of where you are standing, and see no one." These footsteps are attributed to the phantom figure of a 19th century soldier in a red jacket and white belt, seen marching up and down the upper landings. Rebecca came across a miniature of Major Thomas Ferrers of the 9th Regiment of Foot, wearing a red soldier's uniform, matching the description, who died on active service in France in 1817. He fell from a castle ramparts and died, and probably lacked a Christian burial. An exorcism she arranged was said to quiet his tread for a while. Miss Henrietta Knight, who stayed at the house in the early 1900s, was woken abruptly by the sound of footsteps on the stairs outside of her room. So loud and so clear were such footsteps that she was convinced at least 4 people must have caused such a commotion. After the disturbance ceased, she heard rapping noises emanating from the floor and walls, the sound of cloth being torn by unseen hands, and the disturbing sound and feel of someone breathing beside her. Poltergeist activity is common, particularly in the library, which has earned the nickname the Ghost Room. The library is known for its oppressive atmosphere, and sometimes visitors refuse to set foot over the threshold or become ill or overwhelmed. Door handles rattle, objects have been discovered in disarray, and the sound of men arguing has been heard emanating from the library when empty. In the 1930s, a family friend would bring his Jack Russell to the house. Whenever the dog entered the Great Hall, he would sit and beg in front of one particular empty chair, as though he were responding to an invisible master's instructions. The family joked that the dog was begging to the ghost. In the early 2000s, an assistant's dog refused to enter the bedchamber of Henry Ferrers, and no amount of commands, reassurance and treats from the owner would make the dog change its mind. Baddesley Clinton is possibly Warwickshire's most haunted house. The Cotswolds may look idyllic, with sweeping hills and honey-coloured cottages, but its landscape is steeped in superstition, mystery and restless spirits. Few places capture this better than Long Compton and the nearby Rollright Stones, an ancient stone circle dating back before 1500 BCE. Local legend tells that a king sought to conquer the land, only to be cursed by a local witch named Mother Shipton. He and his army were turned to stone, leaving the king as the King's Stone and his soldiers as the Whispering Knights. These standing stones have been shrouded in superstition, drawing witches, pagans and curious travellers alike. The village of Long Compton, just north of the stones, was famous for its witches, particularly in the 19th century. Anne Tennant, a local resident known for her herbal remedies, became a central figure in these tales. On the evening of the 15th of September 1875, she left her home to buy a loaf of bread. On her return, she encountered a group of farm workers coming back from the fields after harvesting. Among them was James Hayward, a local man, often described as the village fool, who had been drinking cider. Without warning, he attacked Tennant with a pitchfork. A nearby farmer, Mr. Taylor, heard the commotion and rushed to help, managing to hold Hayward until the police arrived. Anne was taken to her daughter's house, but despite medical attention, she died from her injuries. She was 80 years old. Hayward later claimed that Tennant was a witch and insisted that he planned to punish other witches in the village in the same way. He was convinced that there were 16 witches in the Long Compton area, whose sorcery and familiars were preventing him from carrying out his farm work. At his murder trial, Hayward was declared legally insane and therefore not guilty. He was committed to Broadmoor, where he died in the first half of 1890, aged 59. Yet the story did not end with his incarceration. Locals began reporting sightings of Tennant's ghost, a stooped, matted-haired old lady in a black shawl, wandering the village and Harrow Hill, vanishing when approached, but leaving an undeniable sense of foreboding. The Times remarked that she was an old woman of harmless character whose ill fame as a witch depended on her sex, age, and absolutely nothing else. Harrow Hill itself, long associated with witchcraft and black magic, is said to host its own phantom phenomena. Witnesses have described a spectral coach and four, endlessly circling the hill, and unexplained cold spots, voices and glimpses of shadowy figures. Tales of witches' meetings at the field known as the Close, coupled with the proximity of the Rollright Stones, lend these stories an added resonance. Nearby on Meon Hill, reports of a spectral black dog stretch back generations. And the brutal murder in 1945 of Charles Walton deepened the unease. Walton, a 74-year-old agricultural labourer, sometimes described as a cunning man, was found pinned to the ground with his own pitchfork. Rumours of curses and witchcraft spread quickly, but the crime was never solved. Long afterwards, locals still spoke of phantom dogs, headless figures, and an oppressive presence on the hill. From the wandering ghost of Anne Tennant, tales of spectral coaches, and the whispering Rollright Stones, the folklore of Long Compton remains vivid. Yet not all Warwickshire spirits inspire fear. In Honington, local tradition speaks of a gentler ghost, known as Old Betty, an 18th century herbal healer. She was known for gathering roots and berries in all weathers, a pipe often clenched between her teeth. After death, she was said to return in a kindly fashion, seen sitting on a wall near the village and nodding to passers-by. Unlike other apparitions, her presence feels watchful and calm, a reminder that some legends carry warmth as well as warning. I hope you enjoyed these ghost stories from the beautiful county of Warwickshire. There were so many stories and locations to cover. Let me know if you'd like to hear more from this region. And today I have some more stories for you, some bits and pieces and a menu. I don't know about you, but I love a Tudor ghost, and I think many of us find this a really interesting time in history. I think it's because so much happened in Tudor times, from battles, beheadings, religious reform, and of course there were significant voyages of discovery. I'm actually going to be doing a course in Tudor villains in April, so I think that will be really interesting. Now, my last video was about Tudor House in Southampton, and goodness me, what a place that is. I don't think I'll ever get over the events that happened there to me. And I did spot a dressing up mirror in one of the photos of Baddesley Clinton. Not sure I'll be looking into that anytime soon after what happened at Tudor House. A long time ago I covered the Ghosts of Warwick Castle, which is a very active place. There were ghosts in the dungeons, in the bedrooms, black dogs in the grounds, seances and affairs were happening, and there's also waxworks, which I really don't like. But I do have a ghost story linked to this. One of the figures said to haunt Warwick Castle is Sir Fulk Greville. He was born in 1554 and he was a really important courtier and statesman, a close friend of Sir Philip Sidney, and a servant of both Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. In 1604 he acquired Kenilworth Castle, restoring it after it went pretty downhill following the death of Robert Dudley. In September 1628, Greville was attacked at his London home by his servant Ralph Hayward, who believed he had been unfairly excluded from his master's will. Hayward attacked him before turning the weapon on himself. Greville's physicians attempted to treat the wounds in the manner of the age, packing the wounds with pig fat in the hope of healing them, but instead the substance turned rancid, infection set in and suffering followed. So for 4 weeks he endured this agony before succumbing to his injuries, and he died. His body was returned to Warwick and buried in the Collegiate Church of St Mary in Warwick, in a striking marble tomb enclosed in its own chamber. Greville's ghost is said to appear here only rarely, but when it does, it makes a striking impression. Witnesses describe a tall figure dressed in dark velvet, a broad white ruff framing his face, standing quietly to one side of the church near his tomb. The apparition neither walks nor speaks. Instead, it seems to materialise without any warning, remains motionless for a few brief seconds, and then gradually fades from sight. I must say that from that description, he sounds like a very well-dressed ghost. I do have another link to Warwick Castle for you shortly. Let's go back to Baddesley Clinton for a moment. There was an interesting story from the village from 1812. In January 1812, during the Peninsular War, British forces under the future Duke of Wellington laid siege to the Spanish fortress city of Rodrigo. After days of artillery bombardment in freezing conditions, 2 breaches were forced in the walls. On the evening of the 19th of January, Wellington ordered the assault. The fighting was fierce, and hundreds of British soldiers were killed or wounded before the city finally fell. One of the soldiers came from Baddesley Clinton. The day after the assault, his mother was at home when she believed she saw her son open the garden gate and walk towards the cottage. He wore his uniform, worn and weathered from the campaign. Overjoyed, she hurried to greet him, but when she opened the door, the path was empty. She searched the garden and nearby streets, but he was nowhere to be found. And weeks later, a letter arrived confirming that her son had been wounded during the assault and had died shortly afterwards. Whether a coincidence, grief, or what some would call a crisis apparition, I always find these stories so moving. I think this next story might be one of the best modern ghost stories I know. In an article in the Daily Mail newspaper dated the 17th of June 2011, television presenter in the UK, Anne Diamond, she's best known for daytime TV, breakfast TV, that kind of thing. She related a chilling encounter she had in 1999 whilst she was house hunting in Warwick. An estate agent suggested a Victorian family home close to Warwick Castle, so Anne Diamond went there and she was shown around by the owner, a little elderly lady with white hair. The two chatted pleasantly as the owner guided her around the property. The lady explained that she was selling to move to a retirement flat. Anne was immediately taken with the house and felt it would be perfect for her and her sons. She put in an offer for the full asking price, but she was told that the owner had decided not to sell after all because she was unable to part with her home, so the house hunting in Warwick had to continue. Months passed and nothing else on the market was even close to this house. Then about 6 months later, Anne learned that the house was back on the market and that they were looking for a quick sale. Eager not to miss her chance, she arranged another viewing, this time bringing her mother. They were told that they could let themselves in and the estate agent handed them a set of keys. Yet, when they arrived, the door opened and the same elderly lady welcomed them inside. "You know the layout," the woman reportedly said. "I'll leave you to look around." Then she shuffled away towards the kitchen at the back of the house. It was getting late in the afternoon and becoming dark. Anne and her mother tried the lights but discovered the electricity had been disconnected. They called out for the owner to ask for a torch but received no reply. In the living room, Anne's mother sat down on a large box-like object and chatted about the house. Then she noticed something odd about the box-like thing she was sitting on. They described it as a large wardrobe lying on its back. "I don't like this, it's shaped like a coffin," she said. At that moment, both women were overcome with a sudden sense of dread and hurried out of the house. In Anne Diamond's words, they both bolted for the front door. The following day, Anne Diamond spoke to the estate agent, who said the owner could not have shown them around because she'd been found lying on the living room floor and had been dead for 2 weeks. The family had to even break into the house. The property had already been completely emptied by her family, and the elderly lady was dead and buried, which leaves you wondering what was Anne's mum sitting on in that lounge. Anne Diamond never did buy the house. If this is true, I just think this is fascinating. I have actually been contacted in the past by people who have sold their homes, sometimes for less than they'd hoped for, because there was activity in the property. One person who emailed me owned and then sold an Airbnb with its own ghost. Imagine that. So I just have 2 things for you today. This is a menu from 1961 from the Union Castle Line, which was a British shipping line that operated a fleet of passenger liners and cargo ships between Europe and Africa from 1900 to 1977. And this is a first-class menu from the ship MV Warwick Castle. She was built in 1938 in Belfast by Harland and Wolff. The fleet had pretty much all of their ships named after castles, including one called Kenilworth Castle, launched in 1903, and this served as a troop transport ship during the First World War. This was also the last ship that Titanic lookout Reginald Lee served on before his death in 1913. He died of pneumonia in Southampton and was 43. So let's have a look at the food. Smoked salmon, various soups, brill and sweet corn. Turkey and cranberry sauce sounds a bit like Christmas dinner, even though it's February when this menu was printed. Veal and gammon, all sorts of potatoes, no French fries or chips, as we would probably have today. Cauliflower cheese, various meats and salads. A selection of puddings. I had to look up Croûte Derby, and I think it's like egg, ham and walnuts on toast. Sounds a bit strange for me. And on this date, Are You Lonesome Tonight by Elvis Presley was the UK #1. And finally, I just have a postcard from April 1904, and I absolutely love the handwriting on these old cards. Dear Mabel, found this in my pocketbook, so I sent it you. I should like to have one from you for my collection. Yours, etc., Bob. The image on the front shows the approach to Mortimer's Tower at Kenilworth Castle, which was built around 1210 to 1215 as part of King John's outer defences. And, get this, it's haunted. This pathway is said to be haunted by a ghostly coach pulled by 4 phantom horses. It is reported to emerge from the southern gate near the Mortimer Tower, clattering across the site of the old causeway that once spanned the moat. Witnesses describe the spectral vehicle rattling along the route before vanishing mysteriously in the direction of Warwick, leaving behind only the echo of hooves and wheels. So that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you'd like to hear more from the heart of England. Feel free to like, subscribe and hype if you'd like to help the channel. I always appreciate it. And all that's left to say is take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.